What I'm going to do is talk about the future of clinical research in private practice. Is it alive or dead? So this is the beautiful Taj Mahal in Agra, India. It was commissioned by Shah Jahan in 1632 as a mausoleum for his third and favorite wife who died during the birth of their 14th child. And it's said that it took 20 years to build, and it is said that he cut off the hands of the architect so that he wouldn't duplicate this in any other form. So at the Urology Center, we affectionately call this the Taj Mahal of Colorado. We're celebrating our 10th year. It took us 2 years to build, not 20. We have all outpatient services under one roof. We offer radiation therapy, surgery, imaging, pathology, and we have a very robust research department. Now, our architect is living with his hands in Boulder, Colorado, so we haven't gone quite the direction of the Shah. This is my research department. And I have 6 people. I really have to give them thanks because if it wasn't for them, we really could not do this. I have 4 full-time coordinators, a manager who's a coordinator, as well as a recruiter. And so in addition to my staff, I have to thank my partners for buying into this and being very supportive. And during my career, I've been the principal investigator in over 200 trials. So this is our mission statement. We conduct clinical research with the utmost integrity and honesty while offering our patient subjects the most advanced therapies, in addition to educating them about their disease, and in so doing, we will protect their health, safety, and confidentiality. I've always been a very strong proponent of research and development, and I think research and development is crucial to the success of any business, whether you are in medicine or out there doing any kind of business. So why did I become an investigator? And if you're not doing trials, why should you become an investigator? Well, there's an intellectual challenge. Keeps you on the cutting edge of technology. It offers new choices to your patients who have no alternative treatments. It strengthens your stature among peers and community. You get to serve on advisory boards, have speaking engagements, and you can be a consultant to industry. And it's a pathway to publication. And it's another way to promote research as a new service in your practice, and it provides some additional revenue to the practice. And yes, it can prevent burnout. How could that do that if I feel like I'm doing 2 full-time jobs? Well, I look at research as being it's actually fun and challenging, and I love trying to get answers to questions that we have in our trials. Physician burnout is on the rise, and urologists are no exception. This was a study done at the Mayo Clinic, and they've surveyed almost 7,000 physicians. 2% were urologists. But with the ongoing regulations, increased work hours, less reimbursement, EMR, all these things that can drive you crazy, it's no wonder that the burnout is higher and satisfaction is down. So these are the key stakeholders in clinical trials. We have the IRB, the sponsor, the investigator, and the subject. So I'm not going to go into all of these individually for the sake of time. And I will say something about the regulatory environment. The pharmaceutical industry is regulated by these authorities, and every stage of development is regulated. Good laboratory practices, good manufacturing practices, and good clinical practices. And I've always wondered, why do they just say good? Why don't you say excellent? But I guess good is good enough for the government. So the FDA has a role in regulating all of these trials and drug development, and what they do is assure the safety and rights of the subjects, and they have input in the design of the protocols and the clinical program. They assure quality and integrity of the data and quality of the clinical trials, and they issue the regulations and guidelines. And if the investigator is the heart of the clinical trial. The soul is the patient, and that's who we are concerned about for their safety, well-being, and hopefully we can improve their condition with some of these therapies that we do. Now, what are some of the keys to success? Here's a menu of things, but I would say that you really have to be motivated and dedicated to doing these trials, and you'll eventually build up a portfolio of nice trials. And so a successful investigator really requires a solid understanding of what regulators, sponsors, monitors, and IRBs and the FDA expect. So this is a clinical primer that I wrote, and it was in urologic oncology, so you can kind of get into the more of the mechanics of this, and there are even better written and more informative papers out there, and you can Google them. But these are the fundamentals of clinical development, and it goes from phase 1 to phase 4. Phase 1 are usually the small trials that look at safety and identification of side effects in patients in small groups. And then if it passes through that, you'll get phase 2, which are larger trials that actually determine the effective treatment and possibly the dosage, but safety is always involved. And then the larger phase 3 trials are really the pivotal trials or registration trials that get the approval for these drugs, and they can involve anywhere from 500 to thousands of patients, depending on the statistical power you need to meet these endpoints. And then phase 4 studies are post-marketing studies. They may go back and look at some safety data. They may look at some other indications that they can use, and you may get these registry trials. But there is nothing in the Code of Federal Regulations that dictates who can do this. You can do any of these phase studies depending on your capability as a community or academic site. And this is the schema of drug development. You can see that we go from discovery in animal and in vitro testing all the way through into our, you get an investigational new drug application, and then go into clinical trials, and you can see our phase 1s through 3. And then if it passes and meets the endpoints, you'll get a new drug application. They'll apply for that, and the drug can be approved by the FDA. And you can see all these regulatory processes that go on through these different stages and phases. So it can, it takes about 100,000 compounds to get to one that gets to market. And that can take 12 years. And in 2003, the cost of this was about $802 million. Now, the Tufts Center for Study Group Development, Drug Development, has estimated that now the cost is, it's skyrocketed. It's about $2.6 billion to bring a drug to market. And, there's a lot of controversy. Does it really cost $2.6 billion to develop a drug? Well, the Tufts Center actually came out with a report, and that's where they reported that. And that was just in 2014. So you have pushback from a lot of these consumer organizations. Even the Doctors Without Borders have been part of this. But, they're saying that they're alleging that the Tufts Center as well as pharma were in collusion to show high prices so they can justify the cost of drugs. But the report was not to try to justify the cost of drugs. It was to try to give an analysis. And, of course, there were grants given by pharma to do these studies, but they also want to figure out what it's costing them to do these trials. And who's paying for all of this? Is it the public and private sector? But this is also out of a white paper that was published last year. The government and BioPharma investments are highly complementary. But you can see that when it comes to the basic research, the public money, the NIH is really supplying or contributing most of that. And when it gets to clinical research, the pharma really spends more on that. But the estimate of what the NIH budget is, $31 billion a year. They spend about $3 billion on their campus in Bethesda, but they give grants out to all of these institutions, even throughout the world. And in the private sector, they spend $51 billion on research. So this debate goes back and forth, and the issues are continuing, and I've just outlined the public and private sectors, who pays for what, but there are some additional costs. There's capital costs of having your money invested in research for all these years, and probably the biggest cost is that only 12% of drugs, so 1 in 8 that goes through the entire phase 3 process, succeed. So the biggest cost, really one of the biggest costs, are the failures. And then now with all these new drugs that we have, especially in oncology, the comparators for these new drugs, which are the standard of care therapies, they're very costly. So if you're comparing enzalutamide to abiraterone, or you're having to use a comparator that's going to be very expensive. So what are some of the industry challenges? Why the frustration with academic medical centers? Well, the academic medical centers are slow to review proposals due to red tape. And I think even when I talk to academicians, they're frustrated with their own centers because it takes so long. IRB approval, in the private world, we can get approval through a central IRB probably in 2 to 4 weeks. It could take 6 months and longer, even up to a year, to get the approval through their institution. And every institution has their own individual IRB board, and they have to approve that. So there are starts and delays in enrollment, there's competing priorities, and there's a sense that they have there's a feeling that they have no sense of urgency. So why has pharma shifted to community physicians? Well, it's because we can review proposals and contracts faster, we recruit patients rapidly, overall our trial costs are low, and we have a pretty diverse base of patients. And to the industry, time is money. Patents are expiring. So the minute they identify that compound, the clock is ticking. So it doesn't say here patients are expiring, patents are expiring. So regardless of these challenges, industry, investigators, and patients can benefit through more collaboration between the academic and private sectors, and we're finding that more and more, especially when we're on cooperative groups with the CTC, the SUO, Clinical Trials Consortium. We have private community investigators working with the academicians, and we can do so in harmony. And Raul and Neil are head of the CUSP organization, which really brings together a lot of these large group practices that do research. And we're trying to be more efficient, and it's really been a great organization to be part of. So when it comes to clinical drug development for metastatic castration-resistant prostate cancer, where have we been, and how did we get to where we are today? Well, these working groups have really been critical in the putting together recommendations for endpoints and outcomes. So we have I'm going to go into each of these working groups. Since PSA was developed, it was really an intermediate endpoint. There have been no drugs approved on PSA alone because it's not a true surrogate marker. And because PSA is elevated in the majority of patients with advanced prostate cancer, and anecdotal evidence suggested that changes in PSA often antedated changes on bone scan, several groups proposed the use of post-treatment changes in PSA to rapidly screen the activity of novel agents for the treatment of advanced prostate cancer. So the first one was really reported in 1989 by Farrow, and many followed. However, the problem was that they all used different post-treatment PSA parameters, and so this limited cross-trial comparisons and ultimately created a lot of confusion about moving compounds or agents forward in development. So in response to that, the PSA working group convened in March of 1999, and they were formed by a panel of experts. And if it's the same panel, these are all very notable. The panel now is 20 medical oncologists who are very notable in the field. You recognize all their names. But they formed this panel to standardize phase 2 trials in CRPC and formulate recommendations to allow clinical investigators to speak the same language. And post-treatment PSA decline did not meet the criteria for a true surrogate marker, as I said, but PSA was still considered a valuable aid in screening therapies to move forward. And so the PSA working group recommendations set the stage for the development of a new generation of clinical trials in advanced prostate cancer. And so this is drug development since 1985, and you can see that we've got LHRH agonists back in 85. But if you see where we have PSA working group plugged in 1999, that there were really 3 drugs that were approved in that time period, and basically really zoledronic acid and docetaxel. And they were really, those trial designs were done under some of the recommendations from the PSA working group. But there were other agents that were out there that were tested that didn't get moved through, and it could have been because of flaws in the trial design. They weren't looking at the right clinical endpoints, because some of these agents were efficacious, like we had atrasentan and satraplatin, but they didn't get the approval. So that led to the prostate cancer working group, and they formed in August of 2008, and they had some recommendations in a shift in emphasis from reliance on post-treatment changes in PSA to time to event endpoints, a proposal for 12 weeks of treatment with investigational product to ensure adequate exposure to a novel therapy, because what was happening was these agents were being tested and at 12 weeks you'd see some progression on a scan, and they say this the treatment failed and it wasn't going to meet an endpoint, so they were stopped prematurely. And then there was a requirement for 2 new bone lesions to qualify for disease progression, and then confirmation on bone scan to rule out things like tumor flare and nonspecific scan changes. And so you can see that since the PSA Working Group 2 met in 2008, that we've had 6 of these new drugs that have been approved. And it was really under these guidelines of clinical trial design that we were able to move these things forward. 5 out of 6 of these were approved on overall survival, and I'm proud to say that in our clinical trials we worked with about 4 out of these 6 in moving these things forward. We contributed to that. Now we've got all these drugs that are approved on overall survival. How are you going to get new drugs approved if you've got a high bar to try to reach with these new drugs? So the PSA Working Group has met, because of new developments, new agents, the identification of new disease phenotypes, and an evolving regulatory environment. We need to update the guidelines and criteria that were set forth in Prostate Cancer Working Group 2. And so even though they came out with their recommendations at ASCO in May of 2015, they had 8 face-to-face meetings over a 3-year period in order to get these endpoints and criteria met. And so what they did was they have a consensus criteria based on available new treatments and disease manifestations, as well as data validating biomarkers that were proposed in Prostate Cancer Working Group 2, and the revised criteria to find the endpoints for M0 to M1 transition. And these recommendations will really help guide us to designing therapeutics being tested in both M0 and M1 patient populations. But you can see that we are now in 2015, and although they convened in May of 2015, a lot of their ideas, these people were on the advisory committees for designing these trials. We now have 3, as Raul showed you, 3 agents. They are AR antagonists in development for M0. Some of these trials started in 2014. They're still accruing, so we have ARN 509. ODM 201, and even enzalutamide, which was MDB 3100. These trials are still accruing. Now we are looking at these combination trials, ARA and androgen biosynthesis inhibitors for the M1 population. So we're looking at the combinations in the J&J 3001, which is a combination of AbbVie plus or minus ARN 509. And then in the a cooperative group, the alliance study is enzalutamide plus or minus AbbVie, so that we might get some answers to whether or not combination trials are important. And there's another drug that's being developed right now, galeterone, which is purported to be a 3-in-1. It's a small molecule that has androgen receptor antagonist capability, androgen biosynthesis inhibition, as well as degrading the receptor itself. So it's going to be exciting to see what those show. And then the PSAWG trial, which is another vaccine for immunotherapy, has just been has closed, I think, earlier this year. They had 1,200 patients. So we're going to have to see where that takes us. And then for 2016 and beyond, we have immunotherapies are very exciting. And now that with some of these recommendations for PCW3, we have serial biologic profiling of tissue and blood, as Raul pointed out. And so hopefully we'll get some predictive biomarkers, and we will be able to start sequencing some of these drugs. So the question is the future of clinical research dead, alive or dead? I would say that the future of clinical research in private practice is alive and thriving. Collaboration between community and academic sites will move us closer to our goal of finding the safest, most effective therapies for our patients. Community practitioners should consider clinical research as an opportunity to expand their careers and benefit their patients, with the caveat that you must have a solid understanding of what regulators, sponsors, monitors, and the IRB and FDA expect.